So again, that's another really great question. I grew up in a small town in Colorado, and I grew up, skiing and playing in the snow. And then, and I always really enjoyed it. And I studied engineering when I went into college, and I was studying materials. And I was actually studying ice for a long time and how to de-ice airplane wings. And I didn't realize that people even studied snow at that point. And then, as luck happened, there was a professor at Dartmouth who needed someone who was willing to study snow for ice, to help with ice core research, and who was willing to go to Antarctica. So I just thought that sounded interesting, and that's what kind of set me down this path. It was kind of luck, but it was all things I was interested in for a long time.
What is one of the most dangerous weather factors on your expedition?
Okay, so weather is a huge factor. A lot of what we do is a lot safer than what it would have been like in Shackleton's time, or it's not. We can predict the weather, so that helps. But we still are remote. We're isolated. We're far from medical help. We usually have an EMT or a medic of some sort with us. This is my finger after it had been frostbitten, and then I was working in a snow pit, and then it got infected. And this is in Greenland, and I was out for about a month before getting to a doctor. And I don't know how well it shows up, but this was actually after my finger had healed quite a bit. It had gotten to the, when you have frostbite, and that's a cold injury, it becomes really swollen and blisters, and then it's susceptible to infection. And it had gotten so bad that they had to drill a hole in my fingernail to let the infected part out. So here's what it looked like when it first. This is about a week into it after, but before it got really, really bad. So frostbite is one problem. This is someone working at the South Pole. You can see it's just cold to begin with. And so then the other things that can happen that are really dangerous are storms. And so this is driving in Antarctica. And it's not that bad. If it's really bad, we actually won't drive anymore because you can't see in front of you. But when you're driving in a whiteout like this, you can't see the sky or the ground at all. And it's you can't see any of the bumps, and it makes you kind of seasick almost. Someone once said it's like driving through milk. And so there's a danger of running into one another, or we don't really have to worry so much about being lost because we use GPS for navigation, but if you were outside of the vehicle, you could get lost. So here's another example of a really bad storm where the tractors have gotten buried. Someone's trying to dig out the tractor in the bottom. And then here, this is my friend Storm had gone to get some food, and we had to use a line out to where we had the food so that he wouldn't get lost because it's so hard to see. And getting lost and then getting frostbite in a storm like this is probably the most dangerous thing.
To get there.
So for the trip that to get to Antarctica, so to get to Antarctica takes a really long time. But I'm lucky because it's nowhere near how long it would have taken them to get there by ship. But at first I have to fly to LA, and then so that takes quite a bit of time. And then from LA you have to fly to New Zealand. Usually is how most people in the U.S. get there, and that takes 13 hours. And then from New Zealand, it's another 8 hours to fly to Antarctica. And then a lot of times I fly to the South Pole, and that's another 4 hours. But I have colleagues that would have been doing similar trips in the 1960s even that had to take ships down. And it would take them 18 months altogether. And because you have to spend the winter in Antarctica, and then you can start out on your trip. And that's some of what Shackleton and Amundsen were facing, is having you can't get there by ship in the winter, so you have to get there before the winter and then set out. So that's why it would take them years and years. So I shouldn't even complain about the 3 days of flying that they took.
Did you see any penguins?
Yes, and I always make sure to include lots of penguin pictures. So, and we always see a lot of penguins on the coast. Of course, in the middle, it's too cold and there's nothing for them to eat. But so this is an Adelie penguin, and they tend to be really curious. They're this high. I've seen a few emperors, but they're not as common as these guys. But they're really fun because they're curious and they'll come right up to you because they don't know what you are. They don't know that that you can cause them harm or anything. So they're really fun. No, and that's another part of the Antarctic Treaty is you're not actually supposed to interfere with the penguins. And then this is a seal that I saw near McMurdo.
And you know those things where you can those exotic animal licenses? If you had the choice to bring one animal from Antarctica that you like the most and have it as an exotic animal pet, which one would you choose?
Well, I don't know if I could do that because they're so happy in Antarctica, but I do really love penguins. They're amazing. They're because they're so curious and they're so cute and they're really fun to watch. But I think it'd be really hard for them to exist anywhere else except up in Antarctica.
Yeah.
What's the most interesting thing you ever found in high school?
That's another good question. I think I probably looked at probably several hundred meters of ice cores, and so there's a lot, and they're not all, it's not anything that's absolutely amazing. So I know I've worked on projects where they found, at the bottom of them, they found leaves in Greenland, and that's really interesting. I've never seen anything like that. To me, things that I find really fascinating are, sometimes you find ice layers where it would have been warm enough to melt, and they're really rare. So that doesn't sound very exciting, but to me it means that there was a warm period at one point. I worked on this really weird ice core from Antarctica that and this is kind of dorky, but normally you expect the ice core to act a certain way, so you have sort of large grains, and then they get a little bit smaller, and then they start growing bigger towards the bottom. But I had a core that wasn't acting in that way, and it was from a spot where they hadn't drilled a core before, so it was interesting just because it was different than what you would expect, and so that was actually really cool, but that was and that the bigger grains, that meant that there was a lot less snowfall there at one point than Bristol. Yeah.
You said that the ice cores, they're made to see a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But is there any particular specifically, or a way that you could make it so they look at something specifically?
Right. So that's again a really good question. There are different groups all over the world that look at different parts of the ice core. And so they have different instruments that are looking at something specific. So for instance, there's a group in Reno at the Desert Research Institute, and they're looking at black carbon. They built this super expensive, fancy machine, and it can measure really tiny parts of black carbon, which is soot that you would see in the ice core. And so that tells you and that's caused by humans. It's a human-caused pollution, or it can be caused by forest fires. So they're looking at something really specific. So what happens with an ice core is you actually take out one ice core, and then you cut it up into a lot of different pieces, and then different groups measure different things. So there are other groups that measure lead in the ice core, and that's another source of pollution. there are groups that look more for sulfuric acid or just different species like that. And everyone works together then to get a bigger picture of what's going on. But there are a lot, the other thing that's happening with ice cores is that there's a lot of research going on and developing new ways of looking at the ice cores in new things. So it's always changing.
Any other animals besides penguins this year?
Yeah, so there are a lot of birds in Antarctica, and I didn't get any of the pictures of them. But my least favorite bird is called a scuba, which is a very large seagull, and they're brown, and they're very predatory. So, and they hang around McMurdo, which is the main U.S. base, and they'll actually attack you if you have any food on you. And so, when the skuas start coming out, you have to be careful to not carry a plate of food around, because they'll actually, I've seen them dive bomb people and knock the plate on the ground so they can eat it, because they're also smart. And then there are also orcas or killer whales. But yeah, there are actually a lot of different kinds of animals.
I've seen like on the life movies where they show animals and stuff.
Yeah.
And there was like a type of seal that was like vicious.
Yes.
Are there any other types of like not fun animals?
Yes. So leopard seals are very vicious. I've never seen a leopard seal. These were, the seal that I showed you was a Weddell seal. And they're so big, they can get up to 800 pounds. They just kind of lie there. They don't really move very much.